Welcome back, and what a joy to have back with us today another warrior of the faith, Dr. Richard Land. He's the president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary, and I voted for you last week. Congratulations, you're back on the NRB board.
Well, yes, I've been elected to another term, and I'm very grateful. And I was listening to your interview with Jerry Johnson. Jerry's a former student of mine. I'm really proud of him. He's doing a great job. Well, yeah, he really is, and the organization is just doing what all it's supposed to do. So congratulations. I'm glad you're there on the board, Dr. Land. A lot to talk to. By the way, good to see you there at the convention. Since we have talked, quite a few things have happening in this presidential race. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know whether to laugh or cry, but I really am concerned. Are Christians checking out on this, or are they just not thinking? Well, I think a lot of Christians need to take a hard look at not just what people say, but what they do and what they have done. The best indicator of future performance is past behavior. And based upon that premise, I think we have to look very skeptically at Donald Trump. Now, I understand people's anger. I understand it's a justifiable, righteous indignation at a Washington establishment that seems both Republican and Democrat to be more concerned about perpetuating itself and about its own well-being than it is about serving the people who elected them to office. I understand that, and they have reasons to be angry. But I'm very fearful that there are millions of evangelicals and others who are considering voting for Donald Trump, or who may very well be terribly disillusioned and disappointed if he were to ascend to the highest office in the land. Because we don't really have any idea what Donald Trump would do, because I don't think Donald Trump has much idea what Donald Trump would do. But we should remember, he says, I'm a deal maker. I'm a deal maker. What do deal makers do? They compromise. They compromise. They compromise their ideals. They compromise their beliefs. They make deals. And I think there are a lot of Americans that are really looking at Donald Trump as the answer. And frankly, this is one evangelical who thinks that whatever the problems may be, Donald Trump is not the answer. In all my years of reading the Christian Post, I've never known the Christian Post to do something so blatantly political as they did just this past week in their editorial that basically says Donald Trump is a scam. Evangelical voters should back away. Wow. So there must be now a real brewing concern of what could happen here. Well, I think that's right. In full disclosure, I'm an executive editor with the Christian Post, and we discussed this issue, and we discussed, this was a departure for us, but we felt that we had an obligation and a responsibility to the Christian Post's readers to alert them that we felt that this is something they ought to be very concerned about. They ought to back away from Donald Trump. We didn't endorse anybody. We just said they ought to back away from Donald Trump because we just don't have any justification for trusting him that he's going to do what he says he's going to do when you can figure out what it is he says he's going to do. Because you've noticed that he doesn't answer questions. He just says, I'm going to make America great again. He doesn't say how. Or I'm going to fix this. He doesn't say how. Or I'm going to do that. He doesn't say how. Before we go any further in this process, we need some scrutiny. And we need some healthy skepticism. Good way of putting it. All right. So is it wrong for people of faith to look into a person's past when redemption is our central theme? I'm amazed at in 2 or 3 election cycles for president, we have gone from abandoning people because they weren't people of faith or they weren't the same faith as we are, to this election cycle, we don't care about what somebody believes, we just want change. Yeah. Well, it certainly is a startling departure from, a presidential candidate's marital history being an issue to a president's marital history being irrelevant in the minds of voters. All right. So
far as we know, Donald Trump has been more of a liberal than a conservative. He's been on that side of the equation longer than he has been on the right side of the equation. And the real stumbling block and the real alarm warning to me was when he decided that Planned Parenthood should be funded anyway. I mean, we're not even grasping that one.
Well, yeah, it's troubling when you see that as late as 3 or 4 years ago, he was espousing and promoting liberal candidates. He was very liberal. Now, I'm a Christian. I believe in redemption. I believe in forgiveness. But we're also dealing with a candidate who has said that he's never felt the need to ask God for forgiveness. Now, by any definition that I know of about what a genuine Christian is, Donald Trump has defined himself out of that definition, because every definition of Christianity that I know of says that you have to acknowledge that you're a sinner, and you have to ask God for forgiveness and trust the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross for our sins. But it starts with asking for forgiveness. If you've never asked for forgiveness, you're not within the boundaries of Orthodox Christianity.
So, Dr. Land, why are Christians voting for him? Why is he? I think he's running about 38% evangelicals. Why?
Well, first of all, I think those numbers are deceptive. These are based upon exit polling, and people self-describe themselves as evangelicals. Now, not everybody that self-describes themselves as an evangelical they're not evangelical. Evangelical is as evangelical does. When you start boring down, you find from Barna and others, for instance, that people who go to church on a regular basis, Donald Trump's numbers are much lower. When you find people who are seriously committed to their churches, his numbers are lower. But to me, it's still a phenomenon worth asking. I believe that too many evangelicals are being way too trusting of what Donald Trump is saying and are not looking into his past performance. And Donald Trump has tapped into a deep well of anger and a deep well of resentment against the Washington establishment. We're seeing a pitchfork rebellion coming to Washington from the right, or sort of right on the terms of Donald Trump, and on the left with Bernie Sanders. And you look at the turnout in the elections. And by the way, please notice this. Donald Trump is winning open primaries in the Republican Party, where people can come in and vote who haven't been Republican. In the closed primaries, the states that don't allow people who aren't registered as Republicans to vote, he's not doing near as well. But you're seeing a huge increase in turnout. Marco Rubio in Virginia, in the Virginia Republican primary, got more votes than were cast in the 2012 primary for all candidates, and he still lost by 3 points because there was a 110% increase in the number of people who voted in the Republican primary in 2016 over 2012.
Yeah, I've been following those numbers, and what's alarming to me, Dr. Land, is that you're seeing that the voter turnout and voting on the Democratic side is down. It's way up on the Republican side. You have to ask the question, are Democrats leaving to come over and vote for Donald Trump? What does that say?
Well, I think some of them are. You do have this phenomenon, that for a significant number of people, their first choice is Donald Trump and their second choice is Bernie Sanders, and vice versa, which at first blush makes no sense. But if you're voting out of a sense of anger and a sense of frustration, and you're fed up with Washington, those are certainly, that becomes more logical. I don't think it's so much Democrats who are coming over and voting in the Republican primary. It's people who haven't been voting, people who have not been part of the process, who are entering the process in order to vote for Donald Trump. I'll give you an example. I had a good friend who was in line at the bank in Virginia the other day, and he said that the person in front of him, the church bells went off, and the fellow turned to my friend and said, "Isn't that a beautiful sound?" And my friend said, "Yes, it is." And he said, I want to restore more of that spirit to America. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump.
Well, frankly, I think that's naive. It's very naive.
Donald Trump's negatives are higher than Hillary's. And my concern is that if he gets the nomination, that there aren't enough blue dog Democrats to salvage this thing if people who don't like him don't vote for him.
Well, I think it's certainly interesting that a majority of people who are voting in the Republican primary would be dissatisfied, according to polls, if Trump got the nomination. He's getting between 35 and 38% of Republican primary voters. That means that a majority of Republican primary voters are not voting for him. They're voting for somebody else. And a slight majority of them, when asked, say, I'd be unhappy, I'd be disappointed if Donald Trump's the nominee. That's among Republican voters. So I think that if Donald Trump, you look at these polls, and they show that the person who does the least well against Hillary Clinton at this moment in time of the remaining Republican candidates is Donald Trump. Kasich beats Hillary. Rubio beats Hillary. Cruz is running even with Hillary, or beats Hillary. The only one who runs consistently behind her is Trump. And so the Republican primary voters are voting for Trump. It defies logic.
All right, let me take a break here, Dr. Land. When we come back, I want you to just kind of reinforce what our Christian responsibility is here in vetting these people, and most importantly, voting. I mean, if we don't vote, then we are voting by not voting. So we'll be right back with Dr. Richard Land. By the way, his website is ses.edu. That's the Southern Evangelical Seminary, ses.edu. A great institution, and we're going to do one whole show just on the seminary coming up here in, shortly. But in the meantime, you can go to ses.edu. We'll be right back with Dr. Land.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back, and what a delight and an honor to have back with us today Dr. Richard Land. He's president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary, an outstanding institution. And let me encourage you to go to their website, ses.edu. They do one of the great apologetic conferences in the fall, and you should attend that, ses.edu. Dr. Land, what are we Christians to do? There's so many potential scenarios here. Let's say he becomes the nominee. What are we to do? Is there time to derail him? And is derailing him fueling those who are angry at the government and catapulting him even further ahead? I mean, we're in a situation we've never seen before.
Well, it's certainly one I've never seen before. And I've been following politics a long time. Let me answer the question I think is most timely at this point, and that is, yes, there is a path to someone else being the nominee. It's a one-lane highway, but it's still there. It's the question of, once again, be careful what you wish for. The Republican establishment put together the Super Tuesday primaries and put them all together at once. In order to, I think, facilitate Jeb Bush's nomination, because the theory was that the person who was the front runner, who had the most resources, could campaign in the most states at the most time and get it over with early. Well, now it's backfired because the front runner is Donald Trump, and he's the one who's putting away delegates early. Let's assume that Marco Rubio, who made up 20 points in Virginia in 5 days, is able to win the Florida primary, which, by the way, is a closed primary. Only people who are registered as Republicans could vote in that primary. That helps Rubio. Let's say Rubio makes up that space and Rubio wins in Florida. That's absolutely essential. If Rubio doesn't win in Florida, I don't see how he has a pathway to the nomination or, keeping Trump from getting more support. But let's assume that, let's say Cruz wins Louisiana, which is coming up. The immediate future primaries are closed primaries, which means that the other people than Trump should do better than they have been doing. Whether it's well enough to beat Trump, we'll have to wait and see. But let's assume that on March 15th, Rubio wins Florida and Kasich wins Ohio. And those are winner-take-all states. At that point, they have essentially caught up with where Donald Trump is in terms of delegates. And then we go from there, and it begins to look at that point like no one will have enough votes at the convention to win on the first ballot. That no one will have, Trump may have more, but he won't have enough. So then you have a brokered convention, you have a contested convention, where the delegates will have to try to come to some consensus so that someone can cobble together the required number of votes to be the nominee. The last time we had anything approaching that was 1976, when Gerald Ford went to the convention short of the number he needed against Ronald Reagan, and he ended up winning after a pretty tough contest at the convention. Whether or not at that point, if Donald Trump is not the nominee, would Donald Trump then to say, well, the Republicans have jobbed me. I got more votes than anybody else. And although, once again, he's not getting anywhere above, I think right now he's gotten about 38% of all the votes that have been cast by Republicans, which is not a majority, but he's gotten more than anybody else. He might say, well, you know, the Republicans haven't kept their pledge to be fair and honest, and so I'm going to run as a third-party candidate. We don't know. But he has not garnered the nomination yet. And then if he does, do disaffected Republicans run a third party? We don't know. I mean, we're out in the ocean here with no charts, no map, no compass. We do have a compass. We do have a compass, and the compass is the Word of God. So we need to be praying for wisdom. We need to be praying for understanding, and we need to pray every day, as I have been for at least a year. God, please give us the president we need, not the president we deserve.
Well, that is beautifully said, Dr. Land. When I was chairman of the Oregon Republican Party for 4 years, we battled with this open primary thing, and it comes up every cycle. And we fought hard to keep it closed because you just explained how important a closed primary really is. And so that's a good thing. Now, spiritually speaking, I don't know if, how can I say this so it comes out right? I just don't know if the faith community's got their antennas up spiritually on this whole thing. We seem to be in the battle of everybody else. We seem to be swayed by all of this rhetoric. We're not going to the compass you just talked to. What's God saying about us? I mean, we got the National Day of Prayer coming up. If there's ever a time for us to be in our face, it's now.
No question, and no question about it. You know, my conviction is that Americans may not get this right, even with evangelicals getting it right. But if evangelicals don't get it right, there's no hope of us getting it right.
Do you think pastors across the country understand what you just said?
Some do, some don't.
Because we're battling with issues not only over the presidential campaign, and I realize there are restrictions of endorsing a candidate. I get all that. But we didn't seize the opportunity to stop the funding of Planned Parenthood in light of all those videos. We let it go through the omnibus bill, and I don't think there was even an anger response back to Congress for what they did.
Well, unfortunately, the majority of Americans don't want Planned Parenthood to be defunded based upon the information they have. And when this whole controversy came up, I said that if we don't defund, if this does not provoke a backlash that causes the defunding of Planned Parenthood, it will say more about us as a nation than it does about Planned Parenthood. And what it says about us is not comforting. It says that many, many Americans' consciences have been seared.
All right. Now, the good news here is, the potential good news here is, we have the numbers if we register and vote, right?
Well, I I don't think we can win an election by ourselves. I think that realistically, evangelicals don't have the numbers to win an election by ourselves. But conservatives and pro-lifers, the candidate of the conservatives, the candidate of the pro-lifers, the candidates of the pro-family, pro-decency groups, they can't win without evangelical support. But even if they get all the evangelical support, that's not enough by itself. Politics is the art of coalition building. It's the art of addition, not subtraction. And so evangelicals need to be united, and then they need to engage in the politics of addition, trying to attract others to their cause.
All right, we had Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and clearly Dr. Ben Carson. And forgive me if I don't understand the beliefs of the others, but those three seem to be the most outspoken evangelicals. And their campaignings are weighing. In fact, Carson's now out. Why?
Well, I think that Carson, I think he's a great man. But I think that Americans were not convinced that he was a strong enough leader and an experienced enough leader in the things they wanted their leader to be experienced in. But earlier in the campaign, we had Rick Santorum, we had Mike Huckabee, who are strongly speak of their faith and have long records of their faith impacting what they do. But now among the ones that are left, you clearly have two people who I think evangelicals should be very much in sync with in terms of their spiritual dimensions. And that's Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. They both speak openly of their faith. They both talk about how their faith impacts their public policies and their public service. John Kasich does to a lesser extent. It's a more traditional Catholic understanding of social issues and social action than the other two. But all three of them stand in stark contrast to Donald Trump.
You think Marco Rubio's hurting himself by calling Trump a clown and a con man?
I think he's hurting himself and helping himself. When he started dealing with Trump on his own terms. I mean, Trump's been doing this since the beginning. Anybody who disagrees with him, he mocks. He mocks their physical appearance. He attacks them in personal ways, like a schoolyard bully. And Marco Rubio is the first one who stood up to him. Jeb Bush tried and failed. Marco Rubio gave better than he got in the last debate. And his numbers started going up, not down. I think, the only way to deal with a bully is to confront the bully and to make it clear that he's a blowhard and a bully and he's all talk and no action. And I can assure you, Donald Trump didn't like what he heard from Marco Rubio and from Ted Cruz in the last debate. And he's not going to like what he hears tonight. Do I wish it weren't necessary? Do I wish that it didn't have to happen? Yes, absolutely. I wish we could have long policy discussions. But, my East Texas grandmother used to tell me, you can't lie down with dogs and not get fleas. Well, if you're campaigning against Donald Trump, you're going to get some fleas. The question is whether you're going to put out the fleas he's got.
Isn't his overall demeanor, character, response, his intimidation, his bullying, isn't that a clear indication of a lack of a genuine Christian character?
Well, it's certainly demeaning to the process. And if, it's demeaning to the process, it is unbecoming of someone who wants to ascend to the highest office in the land. But I think it does show Donald Trump's appeal, Donald Trump's continued appeal, when he engages in what is outrageous behavior. I mean, if you just look, if I had behaved the way Donald Trump behaves, I would have been sent to my room without supper as a boy. I would have been put in time out.
I got to go, Dr. Land. I'm out of time. Thank you. I look forward to having you back often, and one show completely dedicated to the seminary. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
All right, and go to ses.edu, ses.edu. That's the Southern Evangelical Seminary. We'll see you next time.